Well, greetings and welcome to episode 97 of Bible 180. 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. We're on Matthew 14, where Peter walks on the water. You probably know the story, so I'm not going to read it to you. But when you think about who Peter was of the disciples, he really was the premier disciple. He was the rock on which Jesus would build his church. Peter, when the disciples are listed by name, Peter is always listed first. Peter had many high points in his life. He had the courage to get out a boat and walk on water toward Jesus. He was the one who was renamed Cephas, the rock on which Jesus would build his church. Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said that John the Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets. Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So there were many high points in the life of Peter, but there were also many low points. High five, exuberant Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water because the other disciples were just focused on the storm that was going around them. Peter focused on himself when he was on a stormy seas and began to sink. He failed at what he was doing. Peter focused on himself in the courtyard when he denied Jesus 3 times, not just once, twice, but 3 times. Peter had many highs in his life, but he also had many distinctive lows. 3 times he denied Jesus. But one of the most important turning points, one of the shifts that happened in Peter's life, was when he got out of the boat on those stormy seas and started walking toward Jesus. He cried out when he looked at the storm and the waves. He said, "Lord, save me." Jesus brought him into the boat where they realized that he was truly the Son of God and they worshiped him. The story of Peter walking on the water comes from the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. It's in Mark and Luke also. But in Matthew, it follows Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And immediately Jesus told the disciples to get in the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds and then went to pray. In the middle of the night, as the disciples were rowing across this lake, a huge storm arose. The wind and the waves were violently blowing against the boat, and the disciples couldn't make any progress. They feared for their lives because they were sure they were going to drown on the stormy seas. Early in the morning, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water, and they were terrified. They thought it was a ghost. Jesus spoke to them and he said, "Don't fear, do not fear. It is I. Do not fear." And for some reason, who knows, getting inside Peter's mind when he said, "Lord, if it is you, I mean, we're not sure, but if it is you, command me to walk to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come on," and Peter did. Now, pausing the story there for a moment, put yourself in the place of Peter in the boat on those stormy seas. Peter was one who often spoke or acted impulsively about what he was going to do without really even thinking about it. And impulsively and reactively said, "If it's you, okay, bid me come on the water." Where would you rather have chosen, the boat or the water? The boat or the water? I mean, think about it. The boat is relatively safe and secure, and even though the water is rough out there, there's still security and safety in the boat. Plus, you have 11 other disciples with you, and often there's safety in numbers, as they say. The boat or the water, right? Out in the water, I mean, it's rough out there. The waves were high, the wind was howling, there's a dangerous storm, and if you're going to get out of the boat, you're certainly going to sink. The other disciples in the boat, man, you'd make a fool of yourself in front of them if you got out and tried to walk on the water. They'd snicker at you for years. They'd throw it in your face. "Hey, Peter, remember that time you tried to walk on the water? What were you thinking?" They might have ridiculed Peter because of their interest in staying safe, well safe in the boat. They didn't want to risk. They didn't want to shift their lives of following because they didn't know about the wind and the waves, but they were sure that if they got out of the boat that they would think. And if you think about those 11 disciples in the boat, you might think to yourself, where's your boat? Where's your boat? Where do you stay securely and safely? Where is your boat that is keeping you from risking and doing something really great for God? Where are you tempted to put your trust when life gets a little bit stormy? That's your boat. What keeps you so comfortable that you don't want to give it up, even though it might be keeping you from an adventure with Jesus? I mean, that's your boat. What dream has God placed in your heart that when you think about it late at night, you think, oh, I'd love to be able to do that, but I don't really want to fail? That is your boat. What's keeping you from pursuing a dream and shifting into a deeper level of discipleship? That's your boat. Because when you stay in the security of your boat and you never move from there, what happens is that you run the risk of being a boat potato, right? I mean, that's what the 11 disciples were. They were boat potatoes, not just a couch potato, but a boat potato. They didn't do anything. They just watched Peter get out of the boat, and then watched from the comfort of the boat while Peter started to sink. Boat potatoes. Boat potatoes. Have you ever felt like a boat potato, just watching life go by without really grasping some excitement, doing something for God that is beyond your imagination? Have you ever felt that it's just easier to stay in the boat than do something great for God? I read about an article about an exercise that to people to use their imagination, and imagine that you're in heaven with Jesus in a very small room. 2 chairs in a room, one for you and one for Jesus. Jesus gets the big chair. Jesus turns on the YouTube channel of your life, and it's entitled What Might Have Been. What might have been. And you and Jesus watch all the things that might have been able to have been accomplished in your life if you just let God do it. What, imagine, would have happened with financial resources if you trusted God enough to be really generous? Imagine what God could do with the gifts that God has given you if you allow yourself to kind of try it out. Try a walk on those stormy seas. Imagine what God could do with your character if you dared to confess your shortcomings and acknowledge your temptation and pursued that dream that God put in your heart. Imagine what might have been if you would make a deeper shift in your walk with God. Because, the older people get, the more their regrets are centered not on what they did, but on what they did not do. Certainly, people have all kinds of regrets about what they did, but people who live their lives as boat potatoes often regret all the things that they didn't do. They get to the end of life and they just think, I wish I woulda. I wish I coulda, but now I can't. They regret more the things that they didn't do, even more than the things that they did do. Notice how this story ends in worship. Peter stepped out of the boat, risked, walked on water, failed, fell short, was upheld and saved by Jesus. And when they got back into the boat, they worshiped him. They worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. And isn't really that's the way it should be, the flow of our lives? We get out of the comfort of our boats, we risk, maybe we fail, we begin to sink, but Jesus holds us up and delivers us. and then we worship and we give thanks to God. Shouldn't that be just the regular flow of our lives? Hope should get you out of the boat. Trust in God will hold you up. Fear may begin to sink you, and at that moment, everything depends on whether you focus on the storm or whether you focus on your Savior. Whether you focus on Jesus or whether you focus on all the stuff that's going on around you. The story of Peter walking on the water, sinking, saving, getting back to the boat, ends in worship because we serve a great God. We serve a big God. When they got back, they worshiped the God who could feed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The Jesus who could raise Lazarus from the dead, who could heal the sick, give sight to the blind, cast out demons, calm the sea and the waves, and who could not only walk on the water, but could save Peter from him sinking in the water. Why do we worship? Because we serve a great God. And so when we see Peter sinking in the water and then being saved by God, by Jesus, we recognize that we serve a God not because God needs it, but because without worship, we're not complete. We worship a big God not because God needs it, but because we need it. We go to church, we Christians do, because without coming to worship, we can forget that we have a big God who lives beside us when we live in fear. We need to worship and come to worship to be reminded that we can give up many of the things that are holding us back from a true relationship with a living and loving God. We serve a big God because we have to remember that we come to worship and remember how great is our God. And here's a key point I'd like you to remember today. The longer that you stay away from coming to worship on a regular basis, the smaller your conception of God will become. Think about that. The longer you keep from coming to worship on a regular basis, the smaller your conception of God will become. Because we need to go to worship and be reminded that we serve a big God so that we don't run the risk of worshiping just a small God who's kind of like a vending machine God, where we put in a couple coins, think we're going to get the answer to our prayers out. Without worship, a great God, we run the risk of creating God in the image of ourselves. Remember, we talked about that a couple episodes ago. Thinking, well, if I were God, I would do this. Well, the problem is you're not God. You never will be God, and we don't have the mind of God to do what ultimately is best for us. Because when we come to worship, we recognize that our conception of God increases. When we come to worship, we hear we've sinned against God in thought, word, and deed by what we've done and by what we've left undone. And yet God loves us in spite of God. That's a big God. Remember at the beginning when God created and said, let there be, and there was. That is a great God. When God delivered Moses through the Red Sea, did all of the miracles all the way through the Old Testament, provided manna and deliverance and out of bondage in the Babylonian captivity. We serve a great God. When we come to worship, we hear how Jesus lived, died, and rose again so that nothing, anywhere, any time can separate us from the love of God. When we come to worship, we learn like David and Goliath that no matter how great my giant is, God is greater. That's why the story of Peter walking on the water ends in worship, because it has to end in worship. Peter's God got him out of the boat. Peter's God reached out to him and saved him, brought him back to worship. And when Peter got back in the boat, he and the other disciples worshiped him. So remember as you listen to this episode that Jesus is not finished walking beside you on the stormy seas of your life. Jesus is not finished inviting you to get out of the boat and quit living as a boat potato. Jesus is asking you to hope, to trust, to reach out to him when you begin to sink in those stormy seas, because he will hold on to you and never, never, ever let you go. Hang in there with God. Risk more. Get out of the boat when you can. Hope got Peter out. Trust held him up. Fear began to sink him, but faith brought him to Jesus. You take care. Make every day a great day. Not everything will be great each day, but with an attitude and with gratitude, it makes all the difference in the world. You take care. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. And until then, you take care. Bye-bye.